Welcome to the Tamiki Podcast. I'm Matt Jeffs. Today's guest is a pioneer in ergonomics with a career approaching a half century. To date, he has trained and certified thousands in our field, and he continues to be a trendsetter to this day. Please join me in welcoming Ron Porter from the Back School. Ron, welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity to interact with you again.
Likewise, and I hope I didn't make us sound a little too over the hill there by bringing in decades.
Well, the truth is the truth. We can't. I'm sure somebody could track it down anyway if we tried to hedge our bets a little bit on my age. So,
well, I thought it was amazing that you started at 6 years old. So I think we should
thank you.
Share that with you were precocious youth. So
I was. As you know, I'm left-handed, and
me
so
too.
ergonomics was always very important to me, even at 6 years old. In elementary school, the desks were on the wrong side.
Yeah, and like you, that's right. I remember that about us. I had to learn that whole upside down and backwards way, and you have to face play the hand you were dealt.
So we started with ergonomics early.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to go calling this Lessons from the Field, the evolution of ergonomics, because you've observed a lot and it's helpful. And I think for our viewers and listeners, I wanted to start with the front lines. Over the decades, you've worked with, let's say, a staggering range of industries and professionals from all stripes. And I was going to ask if you can recall a surprising or maybe an amusing story, what we might call a war story from the field. Or I know you've got plenty of them, but does one stand out?
I worked for a number of years on site at Lockheed Martin here in Marietta, Georgia, where they assemble a C-130 airplane. And I'd not been out there too long doing the assessments until someone looked at me and said, "You'll fit." And I said, "I'm not sure I like the sound of that." I said, "Where will I fit?" And they said, "A place we call the hell hole." It's the wing of the airplane. And so, it really brought home to me the importance of, physical conditioning for people that are doing work activities. When I did access the hell hole, we were basically in a prone position inside the wing of an airplane. And it was, really eye-opening, as all of these ergonomic evaluations that I've done in my career have been, to see the demands of the job that are jobs that people are performing.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? As you mentioned that, maybe a decade or so ago, I got called to do some physical demand analysis at a boat builders, and they had something called the dog box. And what the dog box was, this metal, it was a box with 18-inch holes, and the workers had to be able to crawl through, like you're describing, and drag or push their welding equipment, their tack welding equipment. And so this was out in the field, not inside the gate, and new hires had to be able to maneuver through the dog box. And I was like, oh my gosh, you have to be a certain build to be able to do that.
You definitely, both of us are physical therapists. And we started in a clinical practice. And so when I would see a workers' comp employee and they would tell me they worked in a dog box or something like that, I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. And so as our practice has enlarged over the years, it was really eye-opening to see the demands that workers are expected to facilitate in performing their work activities. It's, just been staggering to me a lot of times.
It's really good to get out of the clinic. I liken it to a field trip back when you were a school student. I don't remember those days, endless days of sitting in rows straight and quiet, but I do remember the field trips. And that's, for a physical therapist, that's what it's like, getting out in ergonomics and seeing a whole other side of the world. It makes you really appreciate when you get back into the clinic, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I think being in education, you and I both have recognized the need for people to visualize and also participate. And as an ergonomist, going out and being able to actually hold the tools that they used, or experience the environmental issues,
Right.
the heat and the noise and all of those other issues that impact the ability of people to be productive. It was just, really a sobering experience, but as you pointed out, a very exciting one. I never visualized as a physical therapist I'd ever end up in a hellhole. So, yeah, so it's, been a very rewarding career.
Most definitely. Well, let's do a little then versus now, especially when it comes to ergonomics, because we've seen a lot of evolution over the years. And are there any outstanding or biggest shifts you've seen in how companies approach it and workplace safety? Have companies evolved along with us? What do you think?
Slowly, kicking and screaming. Yeah, but most people view ergonomics as a way of reducing their workers' comp claims. And you and I know that it's really more focused on increasing the productivity of the worker.
Mhm.
Going back to being left-handed, if you don't provide a left-handed individual with the correct tool, they may still be able to accomplish the task, but they're not going to be as productive, and you're going to have an increase in error rate. So from a business perspective, I think companies have finally started to recognize more, maybe through you and me and other professionals speaking the language to them, that this is, it has a huge impact on the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that dialogue I often describe as red ink versus black ink. And
Mhm.
we're ostensibly we're brought in to staunch the bleeding, if I can use that
Yeah,
graphic, and to reduce the red ink side of the ledger. But there's a whole black ink side as well that we're addressing, and
definitely.
between in the twain is where the magic is for them. That's what really matters. And
Well,
you know, go ahead.
sorry for interrupting, but you ask about the good old days, which really weren't particularly good old days, trying to sell ergonomics, and today. And I think one of, in addition to management and employees themselves recognizing the benefits of ergonomics, the multiple benefits of ergonomics, we've also seen a change from initially when I first started doing this, it was back belts. You know, you
Yeah.
remember the days of going into, a store where an employee was wearing a back belt, and, you know, it looked like a halter top. It wasn't even on them. And so you and I both knew that it really wasn't doing anything. Eventually, people recognized that ergonomics is really not PPE or equipment. It's more, looking at the design of the job and the techniques that people are using. And
Yeah.
so, as we've progressed, you and I've already had discussions about technology today being used in ergonomics. And I'm really excited about that, that it helps other people that maybe don't have the same background that we do be able to understand and visualize
Yeah.
more clearly what the impact of ergonomics can be.
Yeah, yeah, that I forgot about that back belt era that we passed through, and we both had to tiptoe around that subject because
Mhm.
I was going to bring up next about the gulf or disconnects between the working frontline folks and the C-suite folks, and you may say the wrong thing to the wrong person if you were honest and said, well, back belts, yeah, I don't know how much structural support they're really providing. Well, that might have been the person who ordered them.
Exactly. I had that experience with a client once.
I
Um,
believe it.
I learned that when people ask for my opinion, they really don't want it. They want me to validate their opinion. And so, I believe it or not, have learned to keep my mouth shut in some instances.
Yes, yes, and you taught me and thousands of people some very, very useful catchphrases, like "That's very interesting." What was the full phrase? Forgive me.
Thank you for sharing that with me. Yeah, never. Yeah, we discussed never really until you're sure of yourself. Never validate something, and
Right, right.
most of us know that when you're doing an ergonomic evaluation, often the client is going to either provide you with what they want or request from you what your decisions are going to be. And if you do either of those, sometimes you can stick your foot in your mouth. So
Big time.
yeah.
Yeah. It can come around to bite you, boy. And that's we can only talk about that so much, but it's usually we have to experience it at least once and realize, oh,
Mhm.
I've got to backpedal now. How do I maintain their confidence and
Mhm.
my dignity and realize I think I just spoke a little
Yeah.
too frankly.
Yeah. I know
Well,
what you mean.
yeah, I mean, we all learn it. It's a role we all learn, and you brought up interestingly tech's role in safety, and we're seeing a lot of stuff shake out now from outfits like Tamiki and AI computer vision, but also wearables and exoskeletons and
Mhm.
robotics. And, it's shaking up traditional ergonomics. And I wanted to kind of ask you to speculate if back in our day, if we had these tools, how do you think they might have changed things? What do you think might have impacted us for good or ill? Any thoughts on that?
That's a very interesting question, Matt. If first of all, I would certainly have needed more technology instruction in days gone by. But I think it would have probably, if those types of devices or techniques had been available, it might have been easier to educate a larger group of people
Right.
in the company about
Yeah.
ergonomics, because most of us, or at least when I got started doing this, I was typically either brought in by someone in safety or someone in employee health. And
Right.
generally, they were not the decision maker. They may be able to decide to bring me in, but then when you start talking about restructuring conveyor belt system, that's not a decision that either one of them can make, and often they don't want to die on your battlefield, so they don't
Right.
want to go to bat for you.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think it dilutes the appearance of the possible success of ergonomic solutions.
Right.
We've always talked about, man, people in the C-suite look at ergonomics as a big dark hole they poured money into. Well, we bought all of our office workers new chairs, or one
Yeah.
of the clients I worked with purchased hand trucks with brakes on them for their delivery people to use, but they didn't involve the delivery people in the process. And so a lot of the workers refused to use them. And so
Yeah.
now, the solution looked like had become a problem instead of the success that we were hoping for. But with things, certainly with things that are tied into the postural awareness, the wearables, the software programs that are used when you videotape someone and analyze the techniques that they're using in the workplace, all of those certainly provide a lot more evidence for people to be able to recognize the demands of the job that we've talked about, and also the possibility of reducing those demands and risks.
Right, right. And I think about it from our perspective. I've always been a little bit of a neuro geek, so I'm always thinking about things like cognitive load. And when I look back on how when we would do sometimes exhaustive sheets, assessment tools,
Mhm.
and meanwhile, and I'm dating myself here, but there's a Gantt chart on the wall with all of these different risks that need to be addressed,
Mhm.
and you're front loading all of this cognitive bandwidth on just assessing, just getting to a relative risk score before you even thought about or discussed solving the problem. I just remember the exhaustion in that, that
Mhm.
there was so much heavy lifting on the front end. Now I just want to get this off my desk and get back to that Gantt chart. You know what I mean?
I do.
So,
I do.
so
I think we experience the same things in clinical practice.
Yeah.
We really enjoyed the opportunity to work with the client, with the patient, but the amount of paperwork that was involved in the process was often something that was a deterrent to your enjoyment of the activity as well as the results that you ultimately end up with.
Yeah, yeah. Have you seen the maybe less of a skeptic factor nowadays? Have where people they're not as tough to win over as they were at one time? I know we both worked in different settings that are kind of rural and kind of, what are you doing here, and what, that sort of thing. Whereas I get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'd like to hear yours. Is there a little bit more welcoming understanding of ergonomics in general nowadays? And did you have to turn some people around over your career?
I my answer to that is yes. I think there's people are a lot more tuned in to the need for ergonomics.
Mhm.
Yeah, I see that even with my family and friends, and I know when they ask for advice, I must have turned somebody around.
Yeah.
There, but yeah, I think the term itself, when I started in this, most people thought we were saying economics instead of ergonomics. And yeah, and even though they're intertwined, a lot of individuals had no idea what we were talking about. And with ergonomics, again, they thought of back belts, they thought of chairs, they didn't think of the process that goes into designing a job or a workplace for an individual, and the many aspects of what contributes to some of the ergonomic risks that you and I've experienced in our careers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Even our own work clinically, I don't have the low back for being a physical therapist anymore. I can tell you that. You get up on a mat with somebody, and you're on your hands and knees and lifting and lowering and all kinds of awkward stuff. And as we always used to joke, people don't come with handles on them.
Sure. Yeah,
They're all over the place, and
they certainly are. They certainly
it's
are.
really unwieldy. Well, I know you've had some memorable wins over the years, and we've discussed some of them. They're fun to talk about. Of all the companies you worked with, there's been lots of them, but are there any standouts that you like to think about as a game changer and maybe walk away with a pearl from that experience? Anything you care to share?
Well, yeah, the ones that come to mind that were most obvious, I think, a lot of times were when we worked with companies that were doing direct delivery. We worked with water bottle distributing. There's so much direct delivery today with the Amazons and anything I order. I don't know how they get it here so quickly, but I'm sure that there's a lot of manual labor involved in that process. But
Mhm.
one of the ones that brings joy to my heart is one that you and I actually shared together, where we worked for, I guess we could say, U.S. Foods. I don't think they have any trouble with that. A very large, food wholesaler.
Yes.
When I see one of the trucks now, and I watch the driver, you know, yeah, I watch them do their warm up and stretches that you provided for them, and when we first started working with them, I think it was maybe in 2011 or 2012. For their workers' comp, and I'm pretty sure they were self-insured, was millions and millions of dollars. And then we were brought in by a safety professional that recognized the need to implement solutions for that, and we worked with them to design multiple solutions, including the work and stretch or the warm up programs that you helped us implement. And so in the first year, I recall that the reductions were significant, and that facilitated us continuing to work with them for a
Right.
number of years. So I feel very good about that, and I'm always pleased to see their green and orange truck insignias parked outside a restaurant I'm going into, or just watching the workers.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad you brought that up. You didn't have to, but I thank you for that because it was one that every time I see one of those trucks on the road, I tell people that driver and the warehouseman that filled that truck started with a warm up that we did together, that we developed, and that kind of brings me to another area that I think we agree on a lot of things, and this is one we definitely agree on, and that's the aging workforce in ergonomics. You've spoken a lot on this nationally at conferences and elsewhere. And what key concepts about older workers and injury prevention that's maybe not getting enough attention? I know I've got my ideas, but I want to hear yours.
Well, I'm definitely an aging worker, and as I become what I like to use the term more mature instead of older, I've recognized the importance of people investing in maintenance for their bodies. What I have seen in particular is that those of us that are in that age range, 50, 55 and above, and a lot of people are working into their 70s and maybe even into their 80s. Those individuals actually seem to be easier to educate about ergonomics than the younger workers are.
Mm.
The other thing that I think people seem to think, well, if I hire someone that is, you know, in the twilight years, as my dad used to refer to them, it's a bad investment. But I don't think that's true. I think we're more safety conscious. Yes, we may have bodies that are not as physically fit or strong as they were at the age of 30, but you and I both know that there is a super person syndrome. They found it with the back belt,
Yep,
where young, strong individuals, and I think there are fewer and fewer of those in our society today
that
because
is.
of what we're doing right now, technology. People
Yes,
don't need to get up and move around and do as much physical labor as they used to.
right.
So, yeah, I encourage employers to focus on ergonomics for the aging workforce, but I think it should, as we always say, it should be applied to every worker because ultimately we're all going to be aging workers if we're lucky. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, one
That's
of
a
the
very good point. Go ahead.
one of the questions I always ask when I'm talking about the aging workforce is, how many of you are older than you were 5 years ago? And so, yeah, I want people to think about themselves, whether it's on an individual basis. Our goal when working at the back school, I've discussed this many times, is that ultimately we would like to see everyone as an ergonomist, that they would
Yeah,
recognize, the benefits to them and what I say, slowing down the aging process of the body. That's
right.
really what ergonomics does. Where it depends on what part of the body is being stressed with the work activity, and also their background, their history, the things that they bring with them, whether it's genetic or environmental or experience wise.
Right. Right. Yeah. And one of the things that I remember we addressed with some of those clients with employee stretch and flex in regards to the aging workforce was the slips, trips, and fall epidemic that we talk about. And,
Mhm.
we both allude to from our background in physical therapy. Listen, this isn't our first rodeo. And if you don't address it, it can get worse. So when you have this opportunity to get people warmed up in the morning, do a little balance in there. Have them challenge their balance a little
Mhm.
bit safely so that they don't become that statistic as well. Not just strains, sprains, aches, and pains, but slips, trips, and falls. So I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but that's one that really stands out with me.
Well, it's ultimately, as we do get older, we are where balance becomes an issue because of eyesight changes and hearing changes, and so it's even more important. I was at an event recently with a young man, someone probably maybe about 30 years of age. He was relating to me. He had recently had an experience where he'd lost hearing in one ear, and he was talking about the balance issues that had it had created for him. And
Mm,
so it's yes, ultimately where, as we mature and grow older, all of us are going to have experiences with that. But slips, trips, and falls, as I as I age and as I watch my peer group age, uh,
Right.
is a significant issue, and it definitely needs to be addressed in the ergonomics programs, and as you did with your warm up and stretching programs.
Right, right. It's just something we can't overlook. I mean, we look at the big exposures, the big costs, and we have the distraction component, the struck by objects or equipment because
Mhm.
spans are eroding. We have the slips, trips, and falls, which I would say there's only so much you can bubble wrap a workplace. You have to be able to recognize the workforce has to address this a little bit. And then, of course, the strains, sprains, aches, and pains, as I call them, the work-related musculoskeletal. These are all things that we have to address. And I wanted to get to something a little more expansive you touched on earlier, and that is ergonomics in everyday life. That beyond work, do you see ergonomics being applied or ignored in everyday life? And how can we do better? Are I know you're having those conversations and you're seeing more of it, and that's a good thing. But is there anything we can be doing to do it a little better?
Well, I think one of the places that it certainly begins is with interacting with technology.
Yeah,
We over the my career, we've gone from people using typewriters to now technology. The phone that I've got here in front of me has much more technology in it than the first computer that I ever interacted with. And
right.
so, one of the things that I always tell people when we're doing ergonomics is that it's a 24-hour a day issue.
Yeah,
And regardless of the work activities that they do, everyone is exposed to computer use, and smartphones. I have friends that are older than I am or more technologically challenged calling me for advice. And when somebody does that, that's not a good thing. But actually there was having some repair work done on my home the other day, and the young man that was here that was working on it he was having problems with his neck, and so his supervisor explained that to me, and he said, "Would you mind speaking with him?" And I did, and I asked him how much of his, what does he do in his spare time? Well, he lies in bed with a laptop on, surfing the
oh,
web.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and in addition to that, his exercise activity, which I was glad to hear, he looked very physically fit, riding a bicycle. So
mm,
another situation that places a lot of strain in the neck area. But
that
yeah, I really think that technology has been a double-edged sword. It allows us to interact from a long distance right now, and I love that. But the our bodies are designed to move,
yeah.
and technology is designed to prevent us from doing that a lot of times.
Yeah, it reminds me of a Ron Porter Pearl and of many. And one was I remember you learning from you, posture follows the eyes. And I've taken that
Mm.
to everything I teach nowadays, including like my classes up here at the fitness center, that I'm always telling people about what I call the stoop. And that is that the eyes will start to drift downward. Next thing you know, you're big, and because like you say, the people are starting to not have confidence, and so their eyes are not up on the horizon where they're going, and that's a downward trend if you continue to let the eyes drop down. And now we see young people staring at these things.
Definitely.
There's a long-term thing that has to be addressed. I hear what you're saying. It's an important message.
It's another. I've got friends who are gamers, and I provided one of them this past week with some stretching exercises. They're starting to develop it. They diagnose themselves with carpal tunnel syndrome. I so I've not interacted with the individual, but we had our from a medical standpoint. But in discussing with some of the symptoms, I think it's more likely a problem in the neck and the shoulders. It's not really at the wrist. And so I
Right.
was, yeah, it's interesting that people, if my hand hurts, the problem must be at my hand.
Right.
And trying to get people to recognize that this whole body is something that everything's connected. Yeah, but I do believe that ergonomics is something that people are more aware of,
Mhm.
and and for that I'm very thankful.
Yeah, yeah. Posture follows the eyes. That's a
Oh,
Ron Porter Pearl. I remember that one and have applied it. Well, let's go a little into like legacy in the future as we begin to land this plane. If you could share one golden rule, like a pearl, like I just mentioned there about ergonomics or safety, with our next degeneration of colleagues who are right here with us now, what would it be? Are there any things that you think that they should know starting out?
Matt, I think the thing that I learned most about ergonomics in my career, and something that I sort of alluded to at the beginning of this, was keeping my mouth shut and listening, regardless of who you're interacting with. If you're looking at an employee or a client, you want to listen to what they have to say, not think about what your response is going to be, but just really listen to them. You know,
Yeah,
the question that I always start off with is, tell me a little bit about your job, or where do you feel fatigue at the end of the workday? That type
yeah,
of information. And you know, and then just go all the way up the food chain in the workplace. Listen to the manager. What are their goals and objectives? Find out what their responsibilities are. Find out more about them. Most of or a lot of the solutions of ergonomics you will hear if you listen to the worker,
right.
or if you listen to the manager, or sometimes people that your higher level executives started out as a worker, or they moved to management, and they've got ideas that can be helpful to you. But I what I've learned and what I would like to impart to people is, we want to treat each individual as a valuable commodity. For them respect, listen to the information that they have to share with you, and then remember the statements that you brought up earlier that you got from me. Say thank you for sharing that with me. That's very interesting. Yeah, and it is.
It
But
is.
write it down. Use it as resources for when you make your decisions about opportunities for improvement in the workplace.
That's brilliant. Yeah, and it's prescient. It's also very timely, and let me explain why. I like to tell people I fashioned my career after Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs, and he became something of a hero of mine. And one of the things he shared recently on someone else's podcast was that as he was describing it, and they were both agreeing, we seem to be moving beyond the age of authority, and people are more interested in authenticity now. And
I
that
agree.
also,
That's
and I know that rings through it, and that comes with that humility of just listen. And people appreciate when we say, I don't have an answer for that, but I know where to look, and I will get back with you on that. And so we don't have to bluff. We don't have to blather. We can be ourselves and be authentic. And I think Gens X, Y, and Z, and more people are really appreciating authenticity. It's almost like we don't really want to look. We don't want to be talked down to anymore. The authority thing has had its day, and what you're saying seems to corroborate with that perfectly.
Oh, definitely. I like that explanation that you gave me. I'm going to steal that and use it going forward. But the what I've seen for years is authority really never worked. Employees would nod and smile and say, "Yeah, I'm going to do that," and then when you turned your back, you found that they went back to the way they were doing it before. That's
Right.
why when I try to interact with employees or with clients making decisions, we like to give them the opportunity to make a choice in these
Yeah.
solutions. you don't involve everyone that's a stakeholder in this in the process, ultimately there's going to be somebody that's going to stick a pin in your balloon, and you're not going to achieve the results that you really could achieve with ergonomics, because you and I both know that it does work.
Yeah.
It's always been funny to me when I have done something as simple as adjusted a chair with someone, and you go back a couple of weeks later and they said, that actually worked. And I always like to tell people, well, I did go to school for this. It's not, it's not voodoo. It's based on science. And
Yeah.
that's why if we go back to the wearables and the AI and that type of information, that blends the two together. And
Right.
provide a scientific basis for what you and I already know by just looking at where their eyes are gazing at the workplace.
Exactly. Yeah, beautifully said. And I'm always thrilled when we get a chance to talk and catch up. And this is an opportunity where we get to do it with a recording. So that's even a bonus. But I want to respect your time. And I wanted to ask you, if people would like to learn more about you or your work or your take on things, are there some best places they might be able to find you?
Certainly, they can still reach me through the back school. You can go to the website of the back schools, just thebackschool.net, or my email address is rporter@thebackschool.net. So they can't find me that way. Maybe they can connect with you, and then you can direct them to me.
Most definitely. I've recommended you more times than I can even count.
And vice versa. I really
Likewise.
appreciate the opportunity to work with you over the years, Matt.
It's been a real pleasure, and there's still more to come. So thank you, Ron.
Well,
And let me say, he's a pioneer in ergonomics. He's trained thousands and certified thousands in our field, and he continues to be a trendsetter to this day. Ron Porter, thank you for joining us for the Tamiki podcast. I just want to say it officially. Thank you again.
you're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity, Matt. Have a good evening.
Likewise. And friends, I'm Matt Jeffs. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.